Hi everyone, and welcome to the Be Brave podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive in, I want to give a quick trigger warning. This podcast will talk about child sexual abuse, trauma, and recovery. Please listen with care and kindness to yourself. If at any point you feel triggered, pause, take a break, and come back when you're ready. I'll share some helpline numbers at the end for anyone who needs support. And just so you know, throughout the series, we'll be using words like CSA, grooming, and other terms that might be difficult to hear. Please take care of yourself whilst listening. So, welcome back to the Be Brave podcast, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to remind listeners that this episode covers themes including childhood sexual trauma, emotional harm, identity and healing. Please take care whilst listening. Pause, step away, or come back later if you need to. Your well-being always comes first. Today, I'm joined by Emma, who has kindly and courageously agreed to share parts of her lived experience, her journey of understanding, and the meaningful work that came from it. So, Emma, thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to sort of say, how are you feeling about being here today?
Hi, Chloe. Yeah, thanks so much for having me today. I'm feeling pretty good, actually. And, as excited as you can be to share your story. But yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. So the first question I've been asking quite a lot of people is to help listeners understand the backstory of your story. Could you describe what your early childhood environment was like growing up in the Midlands and living on site at a boys' boarding school?
Yeah, it's pretty unusual, I suppose. Although when I was a child and growing up in that sort of environment, I didn't really realize, I think at the time, how unusual it was for a young girl to be living and growing up in a boys' boarding school, surrounded by teenage boys. It was my normal. And I think it's only since I moved away from there and sort of really reflected and looked back on it that I realized actually that was pretty crazy. I suppose there were a few families that lived on site. My dad was a music teacher, but he also ran one of the boarding houses. He was what they would have called a housemaster. And I mean, I can't remember how many boys that we had in the boarding house, but I mean, it must have been sort of 50 plus, maybe up to 100. We were one family that sort of lived on the end. We had our own sort of house, our own apartment, I suppose, sort of attached to the boarding house. So there was a divide, there was a door dividing us from the boys. But I wasn't the only young child growing up in that environment. There were 2 or 3 other families as well that had sort of their own sort of setup. Some were attached to boarding houses, some had their own house on sort of within the complex, but we didn't really have that much contact time. So it was actually quite lonely for me. I was living there up to the age of 11. It was just me. I have an older brother who's over a decade older than me. So he was already in his teen years when I arrived. So he had his own experience. He attended the school himself. So yeah, he had a completely different childhood, a completely different experience to me. And also being a boy himself, yeah, that obviously came with sort of differences too. But for me, I felt very outnumbered. I was the only girl, one of very few girls living on site at that time. Obviously, I went to school. I went to primary school. That was, yeah, it was sort of my time away from the boys. But I found that obviously growing up around a lot of adults, because obviously I interacted a lot with my dad's colleagues, a lot of staff. There was a matron who was absolutely lovely. I loved the matron. She was almost like a second mum to me. So that provided a lot of comfort. But other than that, yeah, it was mainly growing up around adults and teenage boys. So when I got to school, found it quite difficult to sort of interact with my own age group, my own peers, and especially girls as well. It was really hard. I remember finding it very difficult to separate from my mum, going into sort of preschool and especially starting reception class. I found it really, really odd. And it took a long time for me to settle into school.
So where did you go to school then? So you were obviously living on the grounds in this boys', I'm assuming it's a private school. And so where did you go to school then? So would you come out of the grounds and go to a different primary, or was it?
Yeah, no, it was separate. So, it was a few miles down the road. So my mum would, pile me into the car and drive me away. And it was when I remember driving through the gates of the school, and it was really weird going from a school to another school. But at the same time, it was home. It was just normal. And it felt like the journey to school was endless, but actually it was only 10 minutes. But when you're a child, everything is sort of a completely different perspective, isn't it? And we get to school, and I would always feel that sense of dread going to school. I never really enjoyed it. I loved lessons and I loved learning. That's the part of school that I really, really enjoyed. But it was just going from one environment to another, dealing with change. I just really struggled. I really struggled with change.
You mentioned like feelings of being quite lonely and, I mean, I suppose quite isolated as well in that environment. What do you think contributed to those feelings? Was it just because you were predominantly the only girl, or was there other reasons that due to that loneliness and that isolation?
I think there's a massive element to it being the fact that I was the only girl, but my dad was working 24/7 really. I suppose being a housemaster, you don't switch off. So he'd be teaching in the day, he would be providing pastoral care sort of before classes. After school, he would do rounds at the end of the night. I remember he used to go off through the door, disappear for sort of half an hour and patrol the corridors to make sure all the boys were in bed. So I only saw him very infrequently. When he wasn't working, he really made a conscious effort to spend time with me. And I really treasured those times. And I think he did too. We were actually very close. We had a very, very, very good bond. Even though I didn't see him much in those formative years, he took early retirement. And I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to this, but I spent so much more quality time with him. But he always took a Wednesday afternoon. He would always finish early and we would always go out and do something together. And him being a music teacher, he got me into music very young as well. He offered lessons through his colleagues and friends to me, and he would always read to me. He'd always make sure that I was learning, I was enjoying stories with him. And I always remember those times. And I think what contributed towards the feeling of loneliness was that it felt like, not borrowed time, that's the wrong expression, but it was just stolen moments. I suppose is the correct term for that one, stolen moments. So yeah, I always felt very sad when those moments came to an end. So it would always felt like those feelings then were exacerbated by the fact that I knew that those times were limited together. And my mom as well, I think she was around a lot more again in my early years. And I remember, struggling with separation anxiety from her when going off to preschool and primary school. But again, she went back to work. She was working a lot. It was a very busy household. I didn't see much of my brother, even though he was very involved with me when I was very young. My parents didn't want him to feel left out because I'd come along a lot later. So they made sure that he was really involved and really included. And I really loved my brother, and I still love my brother. And I really looked up to him. But again, having such an age gap, he was wanting to go out with his friends a lot more. And he was involved with like rugby and doing lots of different things. And so again, it felt like everything was very, very rapid. It was a very fast-paced household. And I didn't really know where my place was. I don't think in that environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does completely make sense. That must have been incredibly confusing as well as a young child, not knowing what those feelings are because when you're primary age and you've got these feelings of isolation and loneliness, but you've got people around you, that must have been really confusing because, we can obviously comprehend that now. That even though you can have people around you, you can still feel very isolated and very lonely. But when you're a child, you're probably thinking, well, there's people around. I've got lots of people. Why am I feeling like this? Yeah, that must have been really confusing. And thank you so much for sharing that and going into so much detail and being so honest about it and open. Yeah, sort of more like a specific question, I suppose, now, like transitioning from, laying out what the story is about. I'd like to explore, and only if, you're happy to share something that you put in your bio that you sent to me, but only at the level and pace that you feel safe for you. But would it be okay if we gently talk about how early harmful experiences impacted you rather than details of what happened?
So obviously living in that environment exposed me to, what happened really. And I don't think I really understood what happened until a lot later. I knew something bad had happened, but I never had the words for it at the time and didn't really know how to feel about it. But obviously, living in such close quarters to teenage boys, unfortunately, I did come into contact with a particular boy. I was 9 years old, and he must have been about 13, 14 maybe. at the time I remember a lot of detail, but I think over the years I've kind of, my brain's erased a lot more sort of specific detail. But basically he was underage, I was underage, we're both minors. And I suppose you could argue that perhaps that he was at an age where he should have known better, but maybe not. Being a few years older than me, it's kind of hard to really, you'll never know what's going on inside his head. So it's kind of really hard to comment. But we were both in a situation where we were together and we were alone, and we shouldn't have been. But there was a big element of trust in the school, big element of trust within the boarding house. And yeah, I was left alone with him, and he sexually assaulted me. And like you said, we won't go into the details, but essentially the fallout of that was that, even though in the moment I was very uncomfortable and I said no, that wasn't heard. And I knew that what was happening was uncomfortable, it was painful, and it shouldn't have happened. And I didn't really know how to get away. I was worried about disappointing. I think that I remember that was a feeling.
Disappointing him
And
yeah.
disappointing my dad, disappointing the adults that were around us. I didn't want to cause a fuss. It was very much I want to quietly try and get out of this and just leave, which eventually I managed to. And I remember running back to our accommodation and shutting that door. That door was quite symbolic in this, really. It was the separation between us and boys, but it was also, my dad had an open door policy. So it was kind of, even now, I can't decide whether that it was a feeling of, it's a symbol of safety or not, really. But anyway, I came back through that door and I never said anything, but I wanted to. I remember feeling like I wanted to say something, but I just didn't know what to say or how. But it was very much a defining moment in my life. And I think it really changed me. I was a different person once I walked through that door back into what should have been my home, my place of safety. I didn't feel like the same person. I didn't feel like the same girl anymore, but I couldn't quite understand why. And I remember at the time just wanting to say something to anybody. And I remember Childline existed at that point, but we also, that was an age where we didn't have mobile phones. The only phone in the household was in a shared space. It was in the hallway. It was right by my dad's office. My dad also had one in his office, but he was always there, or somebody was always there. And even if you pick up the phone, someone might also pick up another phone that shares the line and could hear everything that you're saying. So immediately that was like, no, I can't do that. I just have to rule that out. So I just buried it, and I never said anything to anybody for years. And it wasn't until I think I was a teenager that I looked back and reflected on it. It's almost like just popped up in my mind, and I sort of went, oh, that's what that was, because by the time you were in your teens, and I was probably 15, 16, my knowledge of the world has so much more vastly had increased by that point. And obviously understanding what you're going through as a teenager and, hormones, relationships, all of that, it suddenly kind of reframed that experience.
You suddenly go, oh, this is meant to happen at this point, not back then. And you kind of start to understand it more. Thank you for, sharing that. In terms of what happened, and only share this if you feel comfortable, was it just one, I say just, it was, but was it one time that this happened, or was it over a period of time, or was it just one occasion that this happened?
It was just one occasion.
And did he never then said anything else again? Like, you never saw him again, or did you then keep seeing him? I know you said that you don't mention anything to anyone, but how did you then deal with seeing him, or did you not have to see him ever again?
To be honest, I don't actually remember. I think my brain has really blocked out an awful lot from that period. And I've tried really hard to sort of think about it, because I think for so many years, it's so uncomfortable. Yeah, exactly. It was so uncomfortable for so many years. And then a lot later, I'm like, I wish I could remember these things, because I feel like I could take kind of control again of my narrative a bit more but I think my brain has just protected me from so much. But it didn't stop me from going back into the boarding house section. But like I said earlier, I was really different. I started to do like some really reckless things. Firstly, I remember I started to gain weight. I think I was comfort eating. I think I was feeling very insecure. I remember going to school and some of the boys in my class be really really mean about how I looked. Because, I think at that age, 9, 10, your body's starting to really change and you start to feel a lot differently towards yourself anyway. I started to feel very insecure. So I started to be I was a lot quieter. I was always quite outgoing, even though I felt quite lonely and isolated at sort of home. I was always quite chatty, but I remember not feeling so many sort of inhibitions. I remember just being sort of like, well, what you see is what you get. And, I was always quite sporty and athletic. That suddenly stopped. I couldn't sort of run fast anymore. I couldn't put sort of weight on my wrists and like do handstands, which I could before. Like my body suddenly became like a prison. Like it was always painful. It became really painful to do sort of anything. But I remember I started to steal from the boys. I look back and I think, why did you do that? But there was something in me, I think, that was almost like trying to, I think, claim something. And that's kind of how I've connected the dots a little bit later on in life. But yeah, I took a pillowcase and I used to go around the boys' rooms when they weren't in. And it would be like stupid things like pencils, pens, like just little trinkety things, nothing that meant anything. But I remember at the time going, this is really naughty. You shouldn't be doing this. I'm telling myself off as I was doing it. But every time I got away with it, I felt almost a sense of satisfaction, like, I've taken something back.
Yeah. You've gained that control back in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the boys started picking up on it and they started to say to my dad, I don't think she should be allowed in here. And I'd always just go, no, I'm not doing anything. So my poor dad was probably just like, what is going on here? Got more important things to be dealing with. But yeah, it felt good to slip under the radar.
Yeah, completely. Like it is that sort of taking back an element of control, even if it's something like you were saying, small, like a pencil, but you're claiming something back that someone took from you.
Yeah, and I still feel guilty. And I feel guilty about doing it now, know, because it's not a good thing. And I kicked the habit quite quickly because I felt really remorseful. I felt really guilty doing it. But at the time, it felt like it was the only outlet. I couldn't talk about what happened. I didn't feel like I was in a safe space. I didn't feel like I had anyone that would trust me or maybe believe me. So it felt like, okay, I'm on my own with this. Yeah, I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because when you are hiding something and you feel that you can't get it out in any other way or talk to someone, you're going to show that in different ways. And I think everyone's is different. I had different things that I did, and I'm sure lots of other people who have different idiosyncrasies that we gained from having something happen to us that changed us completely. And I don't think that the things that I did, I necessarily would have done if it hadn't have happened. I mean, who knows? I don't know. Maybe I would have. I don't think so. And you probably wouldn't have done that if what had happened to you hadn't have happened. And we pick up on these behaviors because it's our only way of escaping what happened to us or gaining that control back. So it really, someone that had very similar things to you, I didn't do what you did necessarily, but I did similar things. I understand that completely. I get it. And I still now think, oh God, why did I do that? It's so embarrassing, or what on earth? But I understand why I did it. I still have that guilt. I do, of the things that I did.
But also we're just children, that's the thing. And we got to cut ourselves some slack there and just think we were kids and, we're on our own.
You were completely on your own and so isolated in your own little head. Your process, you're not, the thing is, I don't think we did process. You haven't processed what happened to you.
No, you're surviving.
You're surviving exactly in different ways, and it comes out in ways like that. So yeah, definitely cut yourself some slack and don't feel guilty about what you did. You probably wouldn't have done it if it hadn't have happened.
That's very true.
I do get it completely. Like when you're saying, I was like, yep, I did that. So in terms of, you mentioned that you didn't mention it to anyone and it happened and you kept it to yourself. So when did you actually did you disclose to one person? Did you come to the police? And what did you feel keeping it inside for so long and not telling anyone? What kind of effect did that have on you?
I mean, in terms of effect, it made me very secretive and withdrawn. So I think just moving on a couple of years, my dad retired and we left the school. I finished primary school. My dad took early retirement for his health and we moved house. We moved about 40 minutes away. So I was 11 going on 12. So yeah, we moved into a village where, because my family always lived in school accommodation provided by the school. So wherever my dad worked, that was provided. So my parents bought a house for the first time and in this village, and they bought it about 2 or 3 years before we actually moved into it, like permanently. So it was almost like a holiday home. So it was a familiar place. It was a familiar environment. I knew the village well. So that was quite a comfort. And I remember the day that we left the school, I was so excited. I couldn't wait to leave. It's that feeling, I suppose, you get, when you're a kid and it's your birthday or Christmas or something, and you can't sleep, you're up early, you're almost clock watching, that kind of excitement. And yeah, I remember moving there and feeling like I could just breathe for the first time, and I could go outside. I didn't have to worry about my safety as much. I felt like I was actually now going to have a childhood. The only thing that I mean, moving there was great, and spending more time with my dad especially was really, really great. My brother didn't move with us, so that was sad for me because I had to say goodbye. But he was in his 20s. He was starting his own life, and for me, the biggest scary thing was that I was moving schools, and I was having to go into a middle school rather than straight into a secondary school, just because of the school system there was different from where I moved from. So I had to do 1 year of middle school, and this is a much smaller community where kids had already bonded from primary school, they move up into middle school, and they all move to secondary school together. So they've already formed friendships and attachments. And then I'm that new kid coming in, going, already struggling with socialization and not having great, probably social skills with my peers, and suddenly coming in and trying to find my place. I'd, been sexually assaulted only a couple of years before and grown up pretty isolated. It was terrifying, and I really, really struggled with it. And I just didn't have the social skills or the awareness to really pick up on what was going on around me, trying to understand people, like characters and personalities. I fell in with the wrong crowd a couple of times and got sort of led down the garden path on a few things. I was intensely bullied, and I did find a sort of a social group at one point, which I thought was okay, and it turns out that it wasn't okay because it was all girls, and I'm just not used to girls. I didn't know how girls worked. I found that I was finding it easier to make friends with boys, ironically, but girls, I just didn't understand, and they didn't like the fact that I was very reserved. I didn't like to share much, and if I did share anything, I was also had an incident online when, it was when we had dial-up internet still, but, it was it was the early days of like Facebook Messenger and MySpace and all of that. And there was no parental controls, whether there was no safety whatsoever. And we were just there almost like guinea pigs trying and testing these things as 14-year-olds and running into all sorts of problems. And I did end up getting harassed online by presumably an older guy, and got the police involved. I never went to the police about what happened to me when I was 9, but I did with this case because it was really scary. It was getting threatened messages, being exposed, and photos being threatened. I'm going to take your photos and put them online. I was thinking, I haven't sent you any photos, but it doesn't matter. Like, it's the threat, and I thought I was talking to my friend, but apparently I wasn't. And I don't know. It was I remember just being really, really scared. And following that incident, I did confide in that friendship group, and they didn't believe me. So they were basically saying, we want you to be more open with us. And then I am open, but then they don't believe me. And again, it was just brought all that feeling of that isolation again.
Yeah.
Why do I open up? That was massive for me to open up and say anything. And I thought I could trust them. But yeah, it just pushed me further inwards again. I just retreated again, and I felt all alone once more.
I'm so sorry. That's awful. I mean, what you've been through is, I don't even know what the word is, horrific. You can say all the words, really. And yeah, I'm so sorry that you've gone through so much, and more so that you had that isolation, because I know all too well what that feels like. And I'm listening to you and I'm just thinking, oh, I just wish I knew you and we could have been hugging each other and being like, it's okay. The thing is, when people, survivors like ourselves, we have very, very different experiences, but everything is so similar, if that makes any sense. The things that you go through after the incident, it's everything that you're saying that you went through after is very similar to what I went through as well. Like opening up, I was very quiet. I was such an introvert. I still am in some ways, but such an introvert, and I didn't talk to anyone. Another reason why I didn't disclose and I didn't tell anyone, even like my parents and people that were around me. And I was very close to my family, but so introverted. And then I remember having an occasion where I had a group of girls, and I went to an all-girls school, and I struggled socially as well, boys and girls. And I remember I had a group of girls, and I didn't have many friends, and I confided in them, not about what had happened to me when I was a child, but what had happened to me. Very similar. I was online, I was speaking to this boy, thought he was a boy, he wasn't. And I confided, and they thought I was lying. And they said, oh no, we don't believe you. You haven't done that, and you haven't done this. And I got myself into a real situation with this person because I did send photos. You know, you're so innocent. And I think I was about 15. And I thought, oh, someone wants to, they think I'm beautiful and this, that, and the other. And
it's boosting your ego, which you really need at that time.
absolutely, of course. Yeah, you definitely need it. And no one believed me. And I thought, well, if they don't believe me about that, then they definitely won't believe me about what happened when I was a child. So I'm just not going to tell anyone. And I then went even more quiet. I lost a lot of weight. I just, yeah.
It feels so disappointing, doesn't it? It's such a disappointing feeling because you just think, oh, I feel like I've put so much of myself into this, and they can't see that. You feel like you're putting a lot out there, and to them it might not seem like you are, but they have no idea how much you're really trying, and to build those relationships and to have good, successful friendships. And then when it's really disappointing, and it destroys you all over again. You feel like you've built yourself up, and then you're back to rock bottom once more.
You feel incredibly lonely. No one else has gone through what you've gone through. Who can you talk to if you can't talk to friends that you think that are your good friendship group, and you can't even talk to them? Again, you're by yourself. It's a very, very lonely place to be.
But I remember you asked me sort of, at what point did I confide? And, so obviously I couldn't confide to them, but it took another, I'd say, year or two. I did find a really good group of friends following that. So I went through a lot, and, that friendship group, it was sort of broke apart. I walked away, went through a lot of difficulties doing that. I had to be supported by teachers. It was a real, I won't go into it too much, but it was a really, really turbulent, awful period. But I did have a couple of sort of friends outside of that group, that one of which lived just down the road from me in the village. And sort of we had this, really lovely friendship. He was a boy. And it just felt so much easier than sort of dealing with a group of girls. And he was very much like, oh, we'll just come and hang out at lunchtime, and then a sort of a group of us kind of formed gradually over a year. And we kind of called ourselves like a group of misfits. We all sort of felt like we never really belonged anywhere else, but we belonged with each other. And it was really nice. And there's always like, teen drama that goes on, but generally it felt like for the first time I kind of had some stability in sort of with my peers. And it was, one of my friends, we were just chatting, and I think I just dropped it into conversation, like it was just something really casual that happened at the weekend, and they were just like, what? What happened to me when I was 9? And I was like, oh yeah, that happened. Anyway, and then we just carried on with the conversation, and it was only really because we were talking a little bit more about kind of, I think, being a teenager and relationships and feelings and all of that. And, I suppose starting to talk about sex a lot more. And it was that just kind of, I think I just casually dropped it in, but didn't really realize what I was saying. And that was the moment that, because I'd spoken it out loud, then I realized, oh, okay, it's all related to what we're talking about here. And I didn't realize that before.
It's a funny thing because you say it so casually, don't you? And people go, huh? Well, what did we just say? Yeah, it's just this casual thing happened to me when I was, and it's kind of like your brain's way of going, this is when I want to say it. This is when you're going to say it. It might not make any sense, and you might not then want to go into any detail, and people are going to then ask you questions, and you're going to go, no, that's enough now. I don't want to say anything else. I just wanted to get it out.
And it was a really underwhelming reaction as well. But that was kind of great at the time because I didn't really want a big reaction to it. But also, I think it's at a time when I guess there wasn't the awareness back then. If that's, I think if my social group at the time had grown up and they were teenagers now, they might have a bigger reaction, or they might be able to find the words to say something back to me, and I'd probably even have more words to say. But I think back then it was just like, oh, okay, that happened. Oh, that's almost normalized in a weird sort of way. And then I will just move on in the conversation because you just don't have that knowledge.
And how old were you at this specific time?
I think I was around 15.
That's still young to be able to find the words and the understanding, I suppose, not from you, but also from your peers, to actually fathom what that means.
But yeah, you're right. I think it's really a really crucial moment in your development as a teenager, those years, because you really are finding out so much more about yourself, and things start to make sense. And I think for mental health, my mental health was so up and down through those years. And I can never really understand why, because I think I thought at the time, well, I've had a pretty normal childhood. I've had a pretty good childhood. I can't believe when I'm saying, even just saying it now, I can't believe that I actually thought that at the time. But I had nothing really to compare it to.
It does become the norm. Well, maybe, maybe this was normal. Maybe this does happen to other people. I've had a nice childhood. Everything's been nice. So everything is okay. It's not. We all know that part like more well than anyone else, but it's not okay. I think also maybe it's our brains sort of going, you're safe now, you're okay. Don't worry about it, don't think about it, push it to the back. But it comes, like we were saying earlier, it comes out in different ways, doesn't it? And that's when you think, oh, okay, this needs to be addressed.
And I think it also depends on who you've got around you and your environment too. And I think like having older parents, my parents were older parents. They are, they were born sort of at the end of the Second World War, and they're that kind of generation where they don't speak about things, and they didn't really want to talk about sex with me anyway. They were very much like, well, you don't do that till you're married, so you don't really need to we don't need to talk about it kind of right now. And I was like, what? And I couldn't believe it, because, with my friends and their parents were a little bit younger, perhaps almost a generation younger than mine, had a sort of a slightly different approach to things. Not always, but generally slightly different approach. And yeah, just not feeling like it was a space where I could even talk about those things at home, or just very, discouraged, or no, Emma, just, these things aren't important right now. Or if I did want to talk about something, it would always get shut down very quickly. My dad was very good, but, at the end of the day, he was very good because he was very good at talking to teenage boy. That was his job. And he was a great listener. But when it came to girly stuff in his eyes, it was like, this isn't my remit. But bless him, he would try, but we would still never talk about that stuff. And my mum, I don't think, felt like she could either. So, when the stuff happened online, I picked up the phone to my brother because I didn't feel like I could talk to my parents. And then my brother, bless him, I think he panicked and then talked to my mum and dad. And I was like, no, don't, and, that's kind of when the police got involved. And then I felt like I couldn't then go to my brother about stuff because I asked him not to talk to my parents, so you do things out of panic a lot. You sort of think, oh God, well, who have I got around me? And when you realize you don't have many people around, you sort of just choose what you think is probably the best solution in the moment, don't you?
I think that you hit the nail on the head. You have to have people or be in a situation that you feel comfortable in order to do it. And if you don't have that trust, or you don't feel like you can talk about it, and this is a massive reason why I think this sort of podcast or just talking about this is so important, because it's that people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to know it, but they know it happens, especially now. It's so known about, but people still don't want to talk about it. They just want to brush it under the carpet and be like, oh yeah, it happens, but it doesn't happen to us, so it's okay. No, it needs to be one of those conversations that I think also that parents talk about with their children on the daily. Like, both of us have worked at the NSPCC. We know how important that is, and how important Childline is, and things, to have that where children can feel like they can come and talk to you. So if something does happen, they can disclose when they need to disclose and when it's not too late.
Yeah, just normalize talking about sex, because you know what, it happens and we don't need to be so bashful about it. It should be a normal thing. Exactly. And I just feel that, as you so rightly said, if parents can just talk about it with their children and just make it a normal thing, not awkward, not something that can embarrassing, then I like to think that there'll be less problems and more healthier relationships. And, when there is something that's gone wrong, it's okay to talk about it, because I tell you what, I felt like I would be punished if I talked about it. Like it would be my fault. It was all my fault that those things had happened. And, that subsequent things happened, later on down the line as well. And also into my early 20s, I ran into some awful situations. And, in my head, I was like, well, you should know better because these things have happened to you. But no, because there was nobody guiding in the right way. When you lose your confidence, you have low self-esteem, you do more reckless things. But I feel like if I had a safe place to go to, a really healthy relationship with family and friends, then perhaps I wouldn't have ended up in those situations in the first place.
Yeah. I don't want to keep going on about my situation, but I feel like there's quite a lot of parallels between both of us. Our experiences are very different, but again, very similar experiences after what happened with like the recklessness. My mum and dad I'm very close to them, and I was always able to talk to my mum about everything. And she was actually really good about when it came to talking about sex and periods and all of that sort of stuff. And I was always quite open with her, but I never was able to disclose what happened to me when I was a child. And I think that it came with the embarrassment and the shame around they're going to blame me, or, they're going to think, well, why did you let it happen for 3 years, Chloe? Like, why did you not say anything? So I'm lucky in that sense that I was able to talk to her about that sort of stuff, but I still wasn't able to come forward and say. And I think there's a massive element of that shame and that stigma that people like us carry around, well, forever. I mean, I still have it in some way. I've got better, but I'm still got it in some way.
Of course, it doesn't just go away, and it's a journey, isn't it? Your feelings evolve and change and over time, but ultimately they are big feelings. You can't just shake them. I mean, I don't know about you with your situation, but for me as well, there was an element of wanting to protect my parents from the truth as well, because I just didn't want, and I alluded to it earlier, I didn't want to disappoint anybody, but I also didn't want to cause them any pain. Yeah. And especially with my dad, that was a position of trust that, he had, and he almost led me to that situation in the first place. I mean, he physically walked me down the corridor, with me. And I did not have the heart to say what had happened, because I know that he would have really blamed himself. I think ultimately I should have said something, but again, that's with my adult brain. But again, with my mom, I just, and even, today, my dad sadly is no longer with us, but my mom, we're still in one another's lives, and we see each other frequently. And even now, I couldn't say exactly what had happened, because I just don't think that she'd cope with it. So there's definitely a same with my brother. No, my family don't know. And I'd love to tell them in one way, but at the same time, it's sort of, I still carry the same feelings that I had when I was a child but I don't want to hurt them.
The person that abused me, he was trusted by my father. He worked for my father. So the idea of telling my mum and my dad, more so my dad, I think, I don't know why, and that sounds awful. And I didn't tell my mum knew for several years before I told my dad, or actually my mum told my dad. I couldn't even look at him in the eyes and tell him. I was so worried about them and their feelings more than mine, because I knew it would break them, and I knew, that they would have the most unimaginable amount of guilt, because the reason that it happened to me is because they put me in that car, even though the whole blame lies on him and the perpetrator. It always does. But as for me, I blamed myself, and I knew that my parents were going to blame themselves, and I just didn't see how I could not get them to do that. And it would literally eat me up inside. And I knew that I had to tell them, and I did eventually. In my situation, they do know, and I went to the police, and it went to court and stuff. But it was horrific, and it still is horrific now. I still find it very, very hard to talk about, and we don't talk about it really as a family. We don't sit down and talk about it and discuss it. My dad doesn't want to discuss it because he finds it incredibly difficult. He just goes, oh, no, we don't have to talk about that. End of conversation. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I know that he finds it very, very hard. And my mum's a bit better, but I still think that, it's a real challenge. And I still find it very tricky. And even with my sisters, I find it very hard to talk about with them, because I don't want to upset them, and I don't want to keep going into too much detail and think, oh God, should I have said that? They probably don't want to hear that. That's not going to be nice for them. I don't discuss it.
you become so emotionally attuned to other people, and you don't want to make anyone else uncomfortable, then it makes you uncomfortable. And it's this whole cycle, isn't it?
And that is what I think we need to stop. But it's going to be a challenge. It's not going to happen overnight where we just go, oh, let's just talk about everything. There's no stigma, no shame, no embarrassment around it. It's going to take time. But I think we have to get there, because it will help people like us that have been through these situations, and all the other people out there that are potentially listening or have disclosed, or wherever they are in their journey, that, we are able to talk about it so openly, just like we do with mental health. I mean, we talk about mental health now, there's no stigma around it, and that's the way it should be. We should be able to talk about it so openly. We never used to be able to.
But yeah, it's like everything, it takes time. And like you just said, I'd like to think that, so much better at talking about mental health, and hopefully in time we'll get so much better at talking about sexual abuse and child sexual abuse. And I didn't really realize until I first started kind of talking about the situation that I didn't really have a name for what had happened to me. Child on child sexual abuse. It was when I think it was Lucy said that to me for the first time. I went, oh, yeah, of course it was. I didn't even think about it like that, because I've never had words for it before. Never could really understand my feelings towards things before, let alone have a name for something. And it almost just that in itself just validates the whole experience. And then in a way opens the door for, or at least for me, to be able to talk about it so much more openly.
I really want to make that clear. Like, child on child sexual abuse is, and that's not talked about enough either. And I think there's an element of, well, you're both children, so there's an experimental aspect to it. And he probably, but no, it was so wrong, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be talked about. And I don't think people really think that actually, I think maybe they think it happens.
They underestimate perhaps the experience, maybe, but there's no consent there. And at the end of the day, my experience it happened with somebody who was still, 4 or 5 years older than me, who had 4 or 5 years more life experience than me and much more awareness and understanding, and should still be, accountable for their actions.
Yeah, 100%. And he would have known that it was wrong. He was still a child in those terms, but it was still very, very wrong, and definitely should be accountable for his actions, because it's not, well, he wasn't right, and it's not right. And what he did has affected absolutely everything that has happened in your life up until this moment. So, those moments it might have been one occasion, but it's a ripple effect, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It can change a person and shape every experience that follows. That's why I said earlier on that felt like a real defining moment in my life. Whatever happened before felt like it almost happened to another person, and everything that's happened since has happened to me, because I feel like a different person and have every experience has been shaped by that experience. And, it's huge, and it's something that when I look back, I think it was probably less than half an hour of my life. And it's quite incredible how that has completely shaped everything that's followed.
And that is insane when you think that is just that pivotal moment where that it's just shaped you and everything that's happened. That's another, like, when I do my speeches, I talk about the sexual abuse that happened, the child sexual abuse that happened, but it's the impact that has on everything else: neurodiversity, mental health, generational trauma, what you do as a person, your relationships. I mean, the list just is endless. Immune disorders that you can get. It's endless, that what happens.
It is endless. And you know what, I've discovered so much, like I referred to the pain that I experienced earlier, where I physically had changed. I've been diagnosed with autoimmune conditions like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue since. And even going through those diagnoses, they were like, oh, what, trying to work out what's caused this. And I said, oh, it could be a trauma response. It's very often a trauma response. And I was like, oh. And even then my brain went, well, you've not had any trauma. And it was only then a few years down the line, I went, oh, actually, when I really, really think about it, and like I said already, that moment changed me. I think I remember then, actually, those symptoms started to creep in at that point and get louder and louder, as I couldn't understand why I didn't have any energy as a teenager. And, people would always say, oh, you've just got growing pains, or oh, you just need more sleep as a teenager. And yeah, okay, not sure about the growing pains, but yeah, you need more sleep and stuff. But but then I just think, why in my 30s now do I still have growing pains? I'm not growing anymore. Definitely not. But yeah, to get a diagnosis like that when you're 24 and you're really just starting out in your career and your life and everything, and you're sat in a room with people who are decades older than you getting the same diagnosis, and you think, wow, it does make you feel like, I mean, at the time I thought, oh, you really? Is this it? That's what it's all come to. How am I going to live a long life with this? But and then you go through feelings of anger and resentment, and it is really a whole big journey, and there's so much that we can talk about that as sort of a knock-on effect. But it's a lot. It is a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. And the physical aspect of it, I think a lot of people don't realize what comes with that, and that being the autoimmune diseases that you can get, and how ill you can be. 6 years ago, and I went to court, because that was like a whole new trauma in itself. That is when my body went, oh no, this is not okay. And since then I've been getting very sick, and I've had loads of different diagnoses. It's never ending, it feels like, because I kept it a secret for 17 years. I didn't tell anyone for 17 years. I feel like my body held on to it for so long, and then all of a sudden when I came forward, it all just went and came out in so many different ways. And it was really hard to understand and comprehend. I just thought I was falling apart, and I thought, what on earth is going on with my body? Am I that sick? Like, what is going on? And it also takes so long to get that diagnosis, because people are just going, well, there's nothing wrong with you. Your tests are coming back normal. It's just anxiety. It's just anxiety. Go on some more antidepressants. And I was like, I don't do that. Come on, can we get to the actual reason this is happening? And I kept, your body, that something isn't right, and it's taken a very, very long time to get here. And there's still, every now and again, something else will pop up, and I think, oh God, what is it now? It's a new thing, and it's never ending, and it's always there. And
it reminds you of the experience that you've had as well, and it's a whole cyclical effect. But I guess again, we said that mental health, we're talking about that so much more these days, but I think what we don't always acknowledge is that mental health and your physical health are intrinsically linked. They go hand in hand, and you can actually experience both things at the same time. It's not one or the other. And I constantly have to remind myself of that, and I've been through endless amounts of therapy and counselling to sort of, again, also be reminded of that. And it's okay to feel those things in parallel, and that they are linked.
And they are so linked. And it took me a long time to figure that out. And like you were saying, I still struggle with that on a day-to-day basis. And I think, why have I got this really tight chest? Why can't I breathe? And oh God, what's going on? Oh, it's okay. That is anxiety. And it's taken me a very long time to get. But I don't know about you as well, but because of all of the anxiety and everything, all the triggers, I've now got severe health anxiety on top of it as well, because of my body changing over the last sort of 6 years. And I've been in and out of hospital, and I've got all these different things. I've developed really, really severe health anxiety. So anything happens in my body, I'm like, oh my God, I go worst case scenario. I always used to go worst case scenario anyway, because, bad things happen to you, and it's always the worst. So, and it's another element on top of it as well.
I know if the doctor says, write your symptoms down, I'm like, well, how many notebooks have you got? Because I could fill these. And I promise I'm not a hypochondriac. It's just that you're so attuned to your body and how you feel every bit of pain, every change. Yeah, you have to become so attuned to your own body, because there's no one else in your past that's really been there to look out for you and to spot these things. You're in self-preservation the whole time.
Everything that you've spoken about, and all of your experiences, and you've touched on your mental health and physical health, and you've been in and out of therapy and things like that. So with all of that, if someone was listening, or if someone is listening right now and has had similar experiences but has never spoken out about it, because we know that there's a lot of people that haven't, what would you want them to hear right now? If you could give them one piece of advice, or what would you want them to take away from today?
There's so much that comes into my mind, but I know it sounds a bit weird to say it, but be brave and try and talk, and I appreciate it's really hard. There is always somebody out there who will listen, whether that's somebody anonymous, whether you pick up the phone to the Samaritans, for example. I've done that, and it was the best decision I ever made, because it started this journey of being a lot more open and forthcoming, and finding support and a support mechanism to help start the healing journey, or whether it's a close friend or a family member, whoever you feel that you can be safe with and feel safe with, there is always someone out there who's not going to judge and who will definitely listen and support. Because I tell you what, when you get it out, it feels so much better than just carrying it, because then you feel like that there is a future for you and you're not going to just completely fall apart and break physically and emotionally. And it is hard and it's not an easy journey to go through, but you don't have to carry it alone.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And it is hard to speak out. It really is. And it takes a lot. But there is, like you said, there will be someone out there that will listen without judgment. And I think most importantly, believe you.
And it's not too late either. Just because it happened, if it's something that happened to you 20, 30 years ago, or however long, it's never too late. I don't want anyone to think, well, that happened so long ago, so it's not really relevant anymore. It's always relevant.
Always. And you will be believed. I was so scared that people weren't going to believe me because of things that had happened. But there will be someone that will believe you. And you will feel so much lighter. And it's not your fault. Never your fault. Well, thank you. I think that's a lovely place to kind of end it on. And thank you, Emma, so much for, again, being here. I know I've said it a few times, but for your honesty, your courage, just being so yourself, 100% truly to yourself today. And yeah, it's been really lovely speaking to you.
Angie, thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Be Brave Project. If anything we spoke about today has affected you, please remember this. You are not alone. And you deserve support. There are people and organisations ready to listen, to believe you, and to help you through whatever you're facing. Support is available, and you'll find the helpline numbers just below. Please take care of yourself, be gentle with your heart, and remember, being brave doesn't mean being unafraid. It means choosing to keep going. And I'm so proud of you being here. Until next time.